Hello everyone. Now we move towards the third round of the Tata Steel Masters tournament. We will look at a game between Maghsoodloo and Abdusattorov. It's a very sharp, very strong theoretical battle between the two in the opening, and we'll see what emerges. We start with c4, e5, knight c3 and knight f6, knight f3 and e4. It's a two knights variation in the English. Knight g5, c6, preparing d5, and queen a4. Queen e7, defending that pawn, f3, e takes, knight takes, and g6. d4, claiming space in the center, and bishop g7. c5, claiming a little more space and trying to constrict black, which is not actually the most accurate way because b6 can be played here, trying to undermine. And after c into b6, there's d5. Of course, black does not want to capture on a7 and activate the black. White does not want to capture on a7 to activate the black rook. And by playing d5, black has a solid center and the pieces are going to be developed very soon. So e4, challenging in the center, d takes, and knight e5. Black would castle, bishop g5, developing while pinning the knight, and c5. And black would be slightly better here. This would be the way to go. But after c5, first black just castled, playing in a little more modest way, and bishop f4. Well, that's the idea. You want to land a bishop on d6, which would be quite solid. Knight a6 first. A slightly better way could be rook e8, just avoiding any threats of losing the exchange. Bishop d6 and queen e3. Knight d1, queen e4. This is a completely equal position, and the play can go on. But knight a6 was played, so some imbalance is going to be there in the position right from the opening. Bishop d6. Here, the best way to continue is queen e6 directly. Bishop into f8, bishop into f8, queen b3, and queen e7, avoiding a queen trade, e4, and now b6. If, let's say, the b pawn is captured, then you have knight into e4. Knight takes and queen takes. Bishop e2, a takes b6. King f2 and c5. So black is trying to be more active than white because black is down material. But there's a tactic here which solves all problems. Queen into f7 check. You grab back a pawn. King into f7 and knight g5. King g7 and knight into e4 and c into d4. Black again recaptures a pawn. This would be balanced. It would be equal. And if we just go back after b6, if b into c6 is not played, you have e5 instead. Then black can capture on c5, give up that knight for a bishop. Bishop takes a6, queen to a3, and now bishop d3. Maybe the pawn can come to c4 to cement that bishop, and white would be slightly better here. But this is also playable. However, after bishop d6, queen e3 was chosen by Abdusattorov. And this is not as precise because after knight d1, the queen goes back to e6. So here, white has the option of just grabbing that rook. And after bishop into a8, you can play a3 first, just preventing any knight from landing into b4, d6, and e3. Pushing that knight to c7, bishop to c4, knight f to d5, c takes d6, and b5 now. Bishop takes, threatening the queen, so knight takes and queen b3. White would have an advantage here, definitely. White has the exchange and also a pawn, although black has two bishops, but it may not be sufficient. This was the way to go, but after queen e6, Maghsoodloo played knight f2, probably was thinking he wants to push e4. This does not retain the advantage because simply rook e8. h4 first, grabbing that exchange would have actually been better. b6 now. will try to undermine that center white has constructed, and that d6 bishop is now looking a bit vulnerable. Knight g5 first. Queen d5 would be the move to play, because what it does is, after white castles here, then you go to f5, and that knight on f2 is undefended, because earlier it was defended by the king. But after knight g5, Abdusattorov went queen f5 immediately, and the knight is defended now, allowing g4 even. And now he goes to queen d5. So a little bit of move order makes a small difference, but that's what happened. In the previous video we saw Firouzja got one opportunity and he made use of it fully. So let's say, but also after g4 there's an interesting way to play with knight into g4. Knight takes, and queen b3 now, putting pressure on f7. Queen f5, just bishop g2. The rook can come to f1, e4 can be pushed, f7 will come under fire. Knight takes c5, giving up some material to ease the pressure. D takes c5 and bishop a6, putting pressure on e2, e4, and queen d5, going for a queen trade. Queen takes, c takes, and simply castles by white. And white would have a piece for 2 pawns, and white should stand better here. However, queen d5 was played. Castles by white. B takes c5, d takes c5, opening the line, the rook's attack to the queen. Knight into c5 here, going for a counter attack. And here the move is queen a3. Black still needs to find a home for his own queen, so queen c4 check, trying to get out of the way and also save that knight, which is attacked twice. King to b1, and if knight e6, for instance, trying to run away with that knight, e4. Black's queen is trapped on c4, if you can believe it. So there is no decent defense after queen a3, because it attacks not only the queen on d5 but also the knight on c5 twice, and that's the way to gain an advantage and retain that advantage. However, queen c2 was played, and this allows queen into a2, so now the boot is on the other foot. Bishop into c5, and the move here, the right way to continue the attack is knight d5 here. One, it opens that dragon on g7. It prevents b4, which can be a defense white can employ because there's a bishop on c5. And over here, let's say queen a1 check would come, king to d2, and bishop c3 would come. This is very dangerous. If king d3, then bishop a6, forcing b5 and bishop into b5. Just as a variation, what can happen if after knight d5, and then rook b8 should be played after that. Just as an example, probably white may have to give back that exchange sooner rather than later. But after bishop into c5, rook b8 was played first. This allowed b4, opening up an offer for a queen trade. So queen a3 avoiding, and king d2. Now knight d5. And this is a bit different, we can see, because black does not have the same tempos available to attack, but it's still okay. Rook h3, going after the queen, and rook e3, a wonderful move by Abdusattorov. Of course, there's no way to exchange there. If rook into e3, the knight into e3, forking the queen and the rooks. Queen d3 here, queen into, e into, and knight into d1. Black is very happy. Now after knight into d1, d5. Black is perfectly fine here. And if after rook e3, if bishop into e3, then bishop c3 is deadly. You'll force the king to d3 and then bishop a6 will come. So that's not possible. So after rook e3, knight f to e4 was played. Rook takes h3 and bishop takes h3. Now h6. Trying to push that that knight away, and of course the knight has to defend the bishop on h3. So, but there's an interesting line: if knight into f7, queen into h3, and knight f to d6. Black is better here, but this was also an option. And of course, after knight into f7, we don't want to capture that knight because rook f1 will be very uncomfortable. King g8 and knight f6. The queen is landing on g6 now. Rook into f6 even. Bishop takes, queen g6, and white solves all problems, and white can hold. There can be a repetition here. So after h6, knight f3 was played, saving the bishop that way. But now knight into b4. Queen to c1, going for the queen trade, but of course black declines, and queen a5 now. King to e3, avoiding any discoveries. d5. Attacking the knight, opening lines for the bishop, so very sensible. Knight e to d2, h5. There was a possibility of bishop b2 here. If, for instance, queen into b2, then queen into c5 is very strong. That wins. So it was possible to just throw that bishop right there and make the queen move to some uncomfortable square. Because it's not possible for the queen to stay on c1. But anyway, h5 was played first. King f2. So white is trying to run away with the king, probably to the king's side, trying to find some safety, but h takes g4. Knight to b3, queen to c7. Queen to d2, g takes f3. Bishop into c8, f takes e2 first. So there's a Zwischenzug. King into e2, and after queen into c8, black is up 4 pawns, and over here white resigned in a very nice victory for Abdusattorov. And I think perhaps we can just go back over here. After knight into c5, Maghsoodloo had to find queen a3, and then he would have had a winning position. Because it wouldn't be possible after queen c4, king b1 to save that knight in any safe way, because e4 is threatening the queen. But he played queen c2 and gave up that a2 pawn, and after queen into a2, just the tables just turned. Well, that's chess, and that's probably life as well. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you soon for the next game.